The one thing the pandemic has done is pushed estate planning to the fore. We've got the greatest wealth transfer in history taking place, with 100 trillion rand expected to pass from baby boomers to younger generations over the next few years, according to various reports that I've read. And now, with the global pandemic bringing succession planning into an even sharper focus for many families, it's spurring matriarchs and patriarchs of families into action to get their affairs in order. While succession planning has long been on the agenda, I think never before has so much value been at risk of poor planning. So it's time to talk about estate planning, and I'm joined now by Mandy Dix-Peak, Head of Old Mutual Wealth Fiduciary Services, Hilary Dudley, Managing Director of Fiduciary Services at Citadel, and Alex Simeonides, the CEO and co-founder of Capital Legacy. Welcome all. Hilary, perhaps you should kick us off just with the most obvious question. Why have a will? What are the consequences of dying intestate?
Well, Michael, not having a will means you're abdicating choices that you can make regarding things like who to nominate as your executor and which heirs should receive your assets. If you die without a will, all is not lost, because there is an act of Parliament called the Intestate Succession Act, which dictates who will receive your assets and in what proportion. But you essentially have given up all freedom of testation by not having a will in place. And so we really do recommend that you take the time to put something in place. It's a very important document. It need not be complicated, but at least your wishes and how you want your estate to devolve is recorded for everyone to see.
So it's not going to go into the Guardian Fund and be up to the state there. Alex, what are the most important things to get right there? It doesn't have to be complicated when writing your will. Obviously, if you're a high net worth individual, high net worth family with multi-jurisdictional assets, it does become a little bit more complex. But at a base level, what is important to bear in mind to get right when writing a will?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The simpler, the better. I always encourage the will to be free of long-winded wishes, stuff that isn't actually needing to be executed, not assets that need to be executed. Stay away from having the wishes inside the will. Keep it in a separate letter of wishes. And then, like I say, keep it simple, keep it clear. Less is more. You're not there, obviously, when you're reading the will. So it mustn't be ambiguous, mustn't contradict itself. And try to keep it as simple as possible. To the beneficiary, you name the person, what exactly you want them to go. Maybe the other thing, especially you touched on larger estates, build in a little bit of sustainability in your bequest. So don't say my house at 769 Bryanston Drive, say my primary residence. So just in case you happen to have bought a new primary residence, we can execute it according to that. So try building a little bit of sustainability into the words that you have.
I think that's a very good piece of advice, and obviously letting people know where you're keeping the will, because you're not going to be here to tell them once you've gone. Mandy, from your vantage point, what do you think at a base level is important to bear in mind when writing a will?
So, I mean, I have a very basic principle. I mean, I don't think that you can get involved in any financial planning with a broker or an advisor without executing a valid will. So I think they go hand in hand, and often it's a document which I think is probably one of the most important documents that you sign that is often forgotten and often, you know, kind of put in the drawer, and 20 years later you might think, oh gosh, I might have to review my will. I've got married, I've got minor children, I possibly need to nominate a guardian, set up a testamentary trust should I pass away whilst my children are minors, to get out of the whole guardians fund and the master's office debacle. So, you know, simple things like that, and disclosure I think is exceptionally important. So I know we're going to touch on the whole foreign assets and you know, the number of people and rands that are leaving the country and have in the last sort of 3 or 4 months or year, I suppose, during COVID. Is to consider whether you need wills in foreign jurisdictions, etc. So, but also to make sure that those assets have been regularized. If you have foreign assets, make sure you disclose them to your advisor or to the professional that you've engaged to help you draft your will and execute your will. Because otherwise the executor then gets involved in all sorts of complex issues like VDPs, because the testator hasn't actually regularized those foreign assets as they should have during the amnesty years. So yeah, those are just a few of the things that I kind of.
But just to touch on what Hilary was saying then, and I say it as more of a question to my colleagues here because it's front of mind. Why is it that it happens with us once a week, once every 2 weeks? Why is it that people with a huge amount of wealth, in excess of 10 million, are passing away without a will? They've got a financial advisor, they've done investments. It boggles the mind.
Boggles the mind, yeah.
That it's actually the guys and the ladies with more money that are passing away, and you two are in particular in the wealth space. Why do you think they're not doing it? I mean,
well, let's bounce,
has
absolutely. Let's bounce that across to you, Mandy. First, why is this trend happening in the high net worth space?
It's absolutely crazy because I think you go to high net worth individuals go to all this trouble of engaging with a planner, an advisor, accumulating, substantial amounts of wealth, making sure that their estate planning, their financial planning is in order. They've got the correct exposure to all the different asset classes, different countries. They've spread their assets throughout the world, but they don't make a plan to deal with those assets after their death. So what is the point of accumulating all this wealth and then not having a document that actually dictates how the assets should devolve upon their death? So what is the point? I mean, Alex, you're 100% correct. And I come across it, as you say, once, twice a week with people that sit in the high net worth space and are sitting with a will that perhaps was drafted when they started working at a bank or do you know what I'm saying?
Which is sometimes worse, an out-of-date will than no will.
No will at all, exactly, yeah.
A thought to Mandy, right? And I question you. The will is a legal service, right, ladies? And because it's a legal service, it doesn't get included in the financial services space in terms of the regulation. And so it falls flat in terms of the advisor or the banker, whoever's in contact with the clients and helping them with their financial products. There's no legal requirements in their advice to do the will. And I wonder if maybe there's space where doing the will is now included in the financial services debate and compliance regulations. Maybe then, for example, the advisor's coming in, he's doing an investment with Mandy through one of their collective investments, and it's compulsory for them to make sure that they've done some succession planning, and that includes in terms
of TCF. What do you think of that, Mandy?
Alex, I think you're 100% correct. I think a planner, you cannot, as I say, cannot do a financial plan without having done an estate plan. They don't necessarily obviously have to be responsible for drafting the will and making sure that it's executed properly. But the next step should be to refer them to a professional who is able to draft the will in terms of their financial plan, or taking into account their financial plan, obviously what their wishes are, and what comes out of the estate plan. They should have estate planners sitting in their office, not necessarily to implement the document at the end of the day, but to say, well, okay, this is the estate plan, this is the liquidity issue or illiquidity issue. Let me refer you to, I don't know, Citadel, Old Mutual Wealth, Capital Legacy, any one of us, I'm sure, is hopefully capable of drafting or ensuring that a will is executed properly. So,
But back to the cultural issues, and just to interrupt you there for a second, Mandy, and Hilary, to bring you in. Do you think it's just a cultural issue of not wanting to confront our own mortality and not talk about death, that we draft the will 20 years ago when you get your first kind of asset, your first paycheck, and you stick it in the drawer, and then you don't go back to it again? What do you think are some of those underlying drivers behind not regularly revisiting the will?
I definitely think you've hit the nail on the head, Michael. In my view, it's the D word, and that's not denial, it's death. And I find in many instances people are not just not willing to confront their own mortality. And there's also perhaps a cultural element where I've picked up that perhaps from a place of ignorance on my part, but certain people almost wish not to talk about death, thinking they'll bring it upon themselves almost. And so I think a situation has arisen where we don't accept that death as parts of life anymore, and we distance ourselves from it. And that's partly part of the reason why people don't address these issues. But I also think there's this idea that once you've done your will, it's cast in stone, and people don't appreciate that it's an organic document. You should review it annually if possible, but if not possible, at least when a big life event happens, as Mandy mentioned, a marriage, children, divorce, death of your parents, any of those kind of events should trigger one to re-look at your estate planning as well as your financial planning. And people perhaps are just not taught that. It's certainly not something I was ever taught at school as part of learning to live in the real world, to how to, back in those days, write a check, but also to have a will in place. It's a matter of education as well. And I don't think one can assume that because someone's been financially successful, that they perhaps have learned these kind of issues of the importance of having these documents in place.
Education is so critical. It's a bugbear of mine. Alex, we should be teaching it in LO. Meanwhile, we're doing all kinds of esoteric things in LO. How do you do your taxes, your financial planning and wills and that kind of thing? What do you think?
Exactly. So we can have a culture change, but the private sector can only do so much. My big lobby is, can we get some regulation? Can the private sector work with regulation? At the very extreme, in a la-la dream world, right? You're 18, you need this card called the driver's license. You need to renew that every 5 years. That regulation has forced a culture where people go get their driver's license. It's, mom and dad teach their teenager how to drive. It will force those conversations that Hilary was talking about if we can get some kind of emphasis from the regulators in terms of the will. They're the first to throw their hands up in the air and go, we don't have enough wills, but the private sector are crying out saying we can do only so much. We had Wills Week last week, right, ladies? That's it. That's all we have. So I believe that we need a whole lot more regulation that we can partner with and push through.
And
to Mandy's point.
Let's talk about what's going on at the Master's office here, because that's the last place you really want to be ending up in.
You want to go there?
The more of the Master's office.
Can we skip that one?
No, but it's a very serious, and I mean, I just had an interaction the other day at a library, for example, getting a library card. They haven't been issued through the pandemic. The bureaucracy of state has just ground to a halt because of the pandemic. And I can imagine the backlog at the Master's office. And being fair here, with having to shut down if you've got one case of COVID and manage teams remotely, I can imagine it's just gone from bad to an absolute nightmare. Mandy?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sort of like, I don't really know what to say. I've been in this business for over 20 years, and estates used to take us, I mean, Hilary, you can probably attest to this as well, and you too, Alex, between 9 to 12 months, you could wrap up an estate. It wasn't an issue. I mean, I just recently waited 10 months for the master to come back to me with permission to distribute the assets out of an estate. 10 months for one letter after the accountant laid for inspection without objection. 10 months. That estate took 4 years to finalize. 2 years prior to COVID and 2 years obviously during the COVID period. So I understand the difficulties, Michael, obviously, with the pandemic, etc. But I do think we have a serious problem. And then obviously with the Department of Justice's IT system now having been hacked and this whole ransomware issue, it's actually now, it's just gone to another level. So we actually in a worse position than we were before.
That's
it's extremely difficult. It's extremely, yeah. But no, it obviously can, yeah.
Hilary, what has your experience been? Similar to Mandy's in dealing with the Master's office?
Absolutely, Michael. The shutdowns over COVID, the fact that they don't work online to the extent that they should. A lot of the work is paper-based files, sitting in the office. When staff were out to keep the capacity of the office to the right level, they were just not able to work because they don't have their files with them. We've been unable to access the Master's office to speak to people, to resolve issues, and it literally has really, really impacted on our day-to-day business and, of course, on our clients. And there's only so many times you can explain to the heirs the delays as a result of the Master's office. And then people get really, really frustrated. And also, where there isn't liquidity and they're waiting for funds to be paid out, it puts people in a very disadvantageous position. And this IT hack that Mandy mentioned has made it even worse. The Master's Office is not issuing letters of executorship at the moment, even manually. That's been going on since the 7th of September. And the last media release last week said they're still busy trying to resolve the issue. We found out yesterday that our third-party service providers from whom we need to get certificates of balance, to get asset valuations, are unable to take the validity or verified letters of executorship via the online portal that the master has. So they're just not issuing those documents, which means we can't draft liquidation and distribution accounts. So at every aspect of the estate, from the start to the end, as Mandy mentioned, there have been delays, and it's time that radical change needs to happen. It's almost becoming, in my view, a kind of constitutional issue, if you want to take it that extreme, that people's rights are being impacted due to these kind of delays.
Well, we do have the right constitutionally to just administrative action in terms of PAIA, and with this grinding to a halt, I'm sure there is a case to be made. I want to move on though to, so I mean, you honestly, you don't want to be wound up there without a will. Even with the will, it's tough enough, and I think that is the bottom line. And I tend to agree with what you're saying, Alex. There's got to be some more of an outward push, a regulatory push, to ensure that we're talking about this and taking it seriously. Because culturally, and looking at the stats, it also looks like not only will women be responsible for deciding what happens to their own assets when they pass away, but it's likely that they have the final say on the couple's assets as well. So perhaps culturally, the push here for the financial advisor is also to include women in that conversation if they're not being included as a husband and wife. And I do think very often it's a conversation that potentially happens between the primary breadwinner, and historically that's been the man, and the financial advisor. That's obviously changing, and we are seeing the numbers shift in terms of gender parity in the workforce, but that's still got some way to go. So maybe we need to change tack from that perspective. What do you think, Alex?
So, yeah, literally last week, right, having a conversation with a financial advisor, and we were talking about this problem where, I'm not saying it's correct, but exactly what you said, the primary breadwinner is being the guy, and now the sudden person who's never interacted that much with financial services products and had to make financial decisions has this world fall on her all of a sudden, and all of a sudden has to make decisions and look at things like liquidation and distribution accounts and interest rates and taxes, and they've never been exposed to it. And I'm not going to throw it up, but our first black Miss South Africa, we were actually having this conversation with, and she was saying this is a really big problem because women are thrust into this situation, and it's really spurred some thoughts at Capital Legacy about what else we can actually do when we detect the situation of financial literacy. Is there like this gap where we can walk, where we can almost give the basics to this person, male or female, and what it will actually help with is the administration of the estate. You know, there's nothing good that can come from the administration of the estate, ladies. You'll concur. The only thing you can do is do it with compassion, do it well, and make it go as quickly as possible. And this is something that I think we all need to focus on, because where there's understanding, you don't have misperception. And where there's no misperception, there's no complaints. There's just a slightly easier process to get on with the grieving process.
Yeah, and that's why I think so often through misunderstanding, the role of the executor is misunderstood. And so you say, oh no, it's got to be the eldest son. And, no, it doesn't. The heirs, I think, should be kept out of it. An executor is a professional duty, and to deal, as we've just discussed with the Master's Office, take someone who understands the labyrinthine systems and how it all works. Just to conclude, because I think we've got about 7 minutes left, Mandy, and to come back to your earlier point about multi-jurisdictional wills, what are you seeing in terms of the trends inside your own advisory business? Immigration, and we know we've seen the tax base thinning out through the SARS tax tables. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts on a multi-jurisdictional will? If you've got, say, property in Mauritius, for example, there's language issues, there's legal issues to consider. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we had a little bit of a conversation before we started, you know, just to see whether we were all on the same page. I mean, it's such a not black and white answer, because it's going to depend on the nature of the assets that you have and the jurisdiction in which you have the assets. Because a South African will, or a will executed in South Africa dealing with your worldwide assets, can be used in most jurisdictions in the world. Yes, it might, you know, involve an application for probate, or in the UK, or a similar application, legal application in the US. But my experience is that when you have an immovable property, as Hilary said earlier, bricks and mortar in a foreign jurisdiction, make sure that you have a foreign will, because in the majority of the countries in Europe, for example, there's no freedom of testation. So you could be forced into forced heirship. Not great grammar, sorry, but you sort of like kind of pushed into certain percentages going to certain members of your family, and that's probably not what you wanted, and obviously, Portugal's become quite a popular place for South Africans to invest because of the whole golden visa issue, Mauritius as well, and those are both countries that do have forced heirship. So if you haven't taken the trouble to consult with a professional when you have got foreign assets, and as I say, when you've particularly got assets that are bricks and mortar, immovable properties in these various jurisdictions, I think you've seriously amiss, and almost bordering on negligent or reckless for not dealing with those kind of things. Michael, I just wanted to say something else, and it sort of goes to what Alex was saying a little bit earlier, and maybe a little bit off topic from the foreign wills issue, but I mean, sort of 20 years ago or 30 years ago, a will was always like the secret document, that nobody knew about, and, the patriarch had hidden it in his bottom drawer or in his safe, and nobody knew the combination of the safe or what was in the will or whatever. I don't know, and it might be controversial, or it might not be, I don't know, Hilary and Alex can attest to this. I think the more you disclose and the more transparent you are with what is in your will, whether it's a local will or a foreign will, you're going to save your family a huge amount of grief and family annihilation, which usually happens in deceased estates, and your executor a whole lot of trouble as well. So, when I spoke about disclosure earlier of foreign assets in foreign jurisdictions, I think disclosure of the contents of your will is also going to go a long way to ensuring that the administration process, while the executor's dealing with the grief of the family, but the actual admin process of the liquidation and the distribution of the estate is going to be much easier to deal with.
Well, in terms of legacy, that's a great gift if you're thinking in terms of legacy, that you're leaving your heirs and your family that you leave behind. You're leaving them peace of mind, Alex. You're not leaving them with the headache or even uncertain as to how any assets might be divided. And I think that's very important to bear in mind.
Yeah, the will is the place where you can put everything down and you can say, this is what I have. And what's creeping up now, and it kind of talks a little bit to the worldwide will need or local will need, is online assets, crypto. People are earning a lot of revenue from IP online. You've got people who are influencers on social media accounts, people who hold large amounts of crypto or mining. And I think our next step in our evolution as an industry is to be able to deal with that well. Yes, SARS are trying to get a handle on it and get tax from it naturally. And I don't think there's enough conversation happening there as an industry as well, because it's a fledgling source of assets. It's hidden. We don't know about it. When we bring in that estate, we don't know about that Bitcoin. Maybe someone doesn't, and no one knows where the key is. And so we need to also start thinking about things like not just the offshore will, onshore will, but also digital will. And I want to leave that with everyone as well as sort of thing that we as an industry need to start getting well with.
Yeah, and speaking of digital, what happens to your social media accounts and all of those things that live long beyond the time that you expire as well in this digital world? I think that's also important to consider when we're not just talking about rands and cents, very common sense that though. Hilary, with a minute to go, what is your parting thought and bit of advice for viewers when it comes to managing their estate planning in a way that obviously ticks all of these boxes and leaves as little headache and contestation behind as possible?
Thank you, Michael. Definitely, I concur with Mandy about being open and discussing things with your family before they're going through emotional turmoil. Even so, I've had a situation during COVID with a client unfortunately dying of COVID, and having included his family in meetings and in planning. After his death, they just completely deviated from the plan, which wasn't foreseen. And I think it just highlighted to me the real importance of planners involving their family, making sure that the family understands the plan. In this case, it was a high net worth individual, so that it was more than the contents of a will. It was local and offshore trusts and so on. But the fact that they didn't understand, they didn't buy in, and that the solution that he put together for them was perhaps too complex for them, just has taken his plan apart. And it's been a big lesson for me is simplicity, as Alex said right in the beginning, is a good thing, but get buy-in from the family, because if they're not on sides, that plan's not going to work, it's going to fail.
Fantastic. Hilary Dudley, MD of Fiduciary Services at Citadel, thanks so much for sharing your insights into estate planning. No doubt the pandemic has highlighted all of these issues and will hopefully spark a great conversation around education, around opening up, about being transparent with our financial planning and particularly our estate planning as well. She was joined by Mandy Dix-Peak, Head of Old Mutual Wealth Fiduciary Services, and Alex Simeonides, who is the CEO and co-founder of Capital Legacy.